Welcome to episode 222 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com.
And I'm Jill Nowacki, founder and CEO of Humanidei. Thanks for joining us today, where we continue to explore what it really means to lead with authenticity and heart.
This episode is brought to you by the Sheeter Group, a leading executive benefits firm that meets your retention and succession needs. From non-qualified benefit plans to compensation studies and performance design, they're helping credit unions invest in leadership that lasts. You can find out more or learn more at sheetergroup.com.
Today's conversation is all about alignment.
Alignment is what connects what we say we value and what we actually do. It's the inevitable thread that ties together purpose, priorities, and your favorite jelly people.
Do love me some people. And when alignment is off, you can feel it. Decisions get harder to make, communication breaks down, and energy gets scattered or just drained. But when it's right, everything flows with more clarity and ease.
Today, we're going to explore what alignment looks like in leadership, how to recognize when you're out of sync or your organization is out of sync, and what it takes to bring yourself and your credit union back into balance. Jill, when you think about alignment in leadership, and I'd like to start there. I think we like to talk about leadership, right? Like it's kind of the common theme. So where do you see it showing up most clearly? I know in our head, we're probably thinking of people that were like, they're aligned with their life, their mission, the credit union's mission, but also I know you and I've had many conversations over the years about people that, or organizations that were like, it looks like they're missing it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like these two things do not seem to be aligning well. So I guess take either side of that or both. Like when we see it working well, or when we see people and organizations in alignment and when it's just missing, maybe just missing the mark a little bit.
Yeah, I think alignment shows up most clearly in leadership. To me, it goes back to that energy question. And you can feel it in individual or you can feel it in a team. So you can tell that there's something missing on alignment when you see signs like burnout or just low energy, lack of employee engagement, for example. And I would say in those places where you want to look first is if there's a misalignment. And that misalignment, just as you said in the introduction, is what we say we value aligned with what we actually do. Because the quickest way to break down trust and create misalignment is if we say this one thing matters to us, but our behaviors contradict what we say matters. And so that's the simplest thing. Alignment is when what we say and what we do match up.
When our intent and our actions actually both look. I was thinking about that. We hear leaders, and maybe we've even been in that scenario before, but this has been ourselves. When the alignment seems a little bit off, we're saying one thing, but like the actions are different than what we're trying. Like we're not practicing what we preach. And that lack of consistency, it makes it really tough in teams to build trust when it's like, okay, you say you want us to be this until you don't. And then you want us to be that again. The one thing that I was kept thinking about as we were, talking about doing this topic on the podcast, and I don't know, I'm not a trained professional in this, so I don't know if this is true or not. But, that idea, you mentioned burnout. And when I think of alignment, sometimes I oversimplify things, and I think of the amount of many times, like say at a conference or somebody like that, an acquaintance or a friend or somebody that you know fairly well over the years, but all they're doing this year at the conference is complaining.
Oh.
I mean, it's just like, this is bad. This is bad. But it's almost like I don't want to say it's like the blame thing, but it's just like you can tell something is off with them. To me, that maybe it's oversimplifying, feels like a lack of alignment, where in my oversimplifying things, I'm like, I think it's time for a change.
Yeah.
You might want to find a new job. Because
I don't think that's oversimplifying it at all. I think that's exactly as simple as it is. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, this is another example of one of those things that is simple, but not easy, because not everyone knows what their values truly are. Not everyone knows what truly, deeply, intrinsically motivates and inspires them. So if you might be talking to people who are like, gosh, I had all of these goals and ambitions. I thought this is what I really wanted, and now I got it and I'm still not satisfied. Must be someone else's fault. Couldn't possibly be that I chased after the wrong goal.
That's something to me that when I think about alignment, like comes up in my head a lot, is when having conversations, people are talking about the things they want that don't mesh at all with what they have or what they're working towards. To what you were just saying, that if you don't know what your values are, or the other side of that though too, is I think sometimes people in conversation will talk about things they think they want, but that's not really what they want. Like what they're doing today might be more closely aligned with what they want. If you're somebody who likes consistency, you probably don't want to go out and quit your job and start something new. Be like, I'm going to launch a whole new company and whatever. So that to me is, I find this topic very interesting, I guess, to say the least. From a very broad perspective, when a leader is, say, feeling misaligned, how does that flow through? I mean, you kind of touched on it in the very beginning briefly, but like, how does that flow through to the team, which obviously affects the organization and all the way down the pipeline?
Yeah. I think you actually touched on it better than I did. Even that idea, when a leader is lacking alignment internally, or maybe it may not even be internally, maybe the leader wants to go one direction and the board wants a different direction, for example. So maybe there's not alignment in like key decision-making parties on that. What it does is create a lot of confusion and distrust, because if today what we care most about is lending to underserved neighborhoods, but tomorrow we're stressed out because our delinquency is too high. Right. That would be an example of some actions that are maybe not in alignment. We say we want to help people who are underserved, but our success metric is how low our delinquency score can be. So those are going to create, and it could be that there's a sort of lack of connection between the value. Like we may still value people helping people and an understanding of the behaviors that demonstrate our values. So like in an organizational context, a lot of companies will tell you what their values are. And if you ask them, great, tell me how you activate those values. They're like, well, of course we value integrity. Okay, what do you do to demonstrate that?
Just in our nature.
Yeah, it's who we are.
Yeah.
Okay, super. But you better figure out how to behavioralize that, because if you've got 50 people or 150 people or 500 people, they're all going to have a different interpretation of that, what that means. Yep. And so when you go back again to that idea, it's when we say we do aligns with what we actually do. So you better figure out how to behavioralize that. So if we're people helping people and we really care about lending to the underserved, we need to make sure our actions and our success metrics and our goals align with that.
It doesn't surprise me that you brought up the board, like CEO relationship, since you're doing a lot of strategic planning this time of year, right?
Tis the season.
Tis the season. So, but it made me laugh. I was sitting over here on the other side of the table, kind of laughing, and I don't think I'll get in trouble for saying this because it's been a long time in the past. But when we hired our first CEO, I remember Lauren was doing extremely well, and I don't think she'll get mad that I'm telling this story, but. And hopefully we've done much better job as a board, I guess you could say, Dave and I with Greg. But that first year, there was like, she was doing so much well, but there was something that Dave and I, as we were coming towards the end of the first year, we were like, well, what about, we're not spending enough time on, what about this? And you actually had Dave and I go back to the goals we set. And the thing that we were like, well, what about this? Was not in the goals at all. Like it was nothing that we ever talked about, right? So even though we thought our alignment was all there, we're like, but one part was missing. So for the next year, we had the conversation. It was like, well, now here's a measurable thing that we can all talk about. When we did our planning, the three of us at that time, it's such a funny thing when I think about is, that idea of whether it's a board level, but it's also from a leadership standpoint to your team. And my guess is there were many times early on as my squirrel brain was bouncing all over the place building, CUInsight, where it was like, we need to work on this. why'd we stop working on that? Well, because you haven't mentioned it or it wasn't laid out well. So yeah, I thought that was funny. Sorry.
First of all, Lauren shouldn't mind you telling that story at all because it doesn't make her look bad. It makes you look bad.
It made Dave and I look bad.
She was doing exactly what you said.
We didn't know how to be a board yet. So.
Let's be clear. Yeah, Lauren said, these are the goals. Cool. I'll hit them.
She's like, I'll nail that. We're like, oh, wait, there was a hidden goal that you missed somehow.
Yeah. If only it was as easy to point that out to every board as it is to you. Like, oh, you can't actually evaluate that person on something you didn't tell them to do.
We're like, right. Okay.
But yeah, and that's a great example of how misalignment at the leadership level does create confusion and create some stress too. Because if I'm in Lauren's position there, I'd be like, look at me. I won all the goals. Yeah. Like, and then instead of, yay, what a celebration, it becomes, what about this? Like, well, that's exhausting. I thought we were here to celebrate. And so like that concept of that change, that the potential for that has a potential ripple effect where it goes into causing stress for someone. And then that person then is like, okay, team, we got to shift directions really fast. And they're like, we were so excited about all rowing in that direction. And now we've got to turn this whole thing. And so that can be tricky for sure.
Well, we're still early in this. I'd like to ask kind of something else for you here, because we just mentioned it is strategic planning season. You're walking into a lot of organizations on a Saturday and spending all day with them. The idea of this question to me was like so powerful because I think we could, like as leaders, we could also do this ourselves in a sense, not just being like the outsider that's coming in for the day. But if you look at the organization, when you're walking in, what clues are you seeing right away that this organization is either aligned and this is going to be we can just keep pushing forward because everybody's rowing the same direction, or where you're like, I had a plan, but before we can get to this plan, I better get everybody else, because right now it seems like half the boat's rowing one way and half the boats. I went to Orange Theory this morning and had 14 minutes of rowing, so I got rowing analogies on my brain. But yeah, so it's do you know what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah. I do. Yeah. So signs of alignment in an organization are so let's say it's a team maybe I'm not intimately familiar with, and so I walk in and maybe I'm meeting some of the executives for the first time, and when they speak, I can't immediately tell what their functional role is. That's actually a sign of potential high alignment. Because if the CFO is talking about the value of lending to the underserved, or the CHRO is talking about the importance of ensuring membership growth, we are in a situation where there is clarity on the goals to the extent that even if it's not in your functional area, you know what the goal is. Conversely, if I walk into an organization and I say, okay, super, what's important about accomplishments this year? And I've got one person who's like employee engagement, employee turnover, the cost of health insurance. Oh, so you're in charge of HR? Like, it shouldn't be that obvious. Like, if somebody is observing the room without knowing who the players are, they shouldn't be able to tell exactly what the functional roles are, because there should be such alignment in organizational goals that we're not seeing that, well, my job is this. And instead we have that shared common vision of what we do and why we do it.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. When you first started that, I was actually thinking the opposite way of that. No, see, I learned.
Because role clarity is important, right? We don't want the CHRO to be like, well, when I led the ALM meeting last week and decided we should invest in this portfolio, like, no, that's not what I'm advocating for. But it's something as big as strategic planning. This isn't a tactical update. This is long-term vision. How do we become who we really want to be? That's where that clarity of mission and not so much functional focus should really rise to the top.
As we kind of lead into as we were talking through this, kind of broke this down into like 3 different sections. So this idea of like, what leads people? I feel like we could spend so much time here, but the most important part is probably following it. But I mean, I think there is, maybe it's the same, but in my mind, I think it's a little bit different. But what throws leaders out of alignment and what throws organizations out of alignment? Because that can change over the course of a year. It can change with, I think, as individuals, it can change with life events and things of that nature. But my guess is probably the same with organizations. So
yes. Short answer, and true of both individuals and organizations, stress. So, and when you think about stress, there's distress and there's eustress. So distress is that negative stress, like tension, concern. Eustress is actually a happy stress. Something really exciting is going on. There's tremendous opportunity. I'm happy about it, but it's still causing me a stressor. So for example,
would the distress be like fear?
An outcome of distress may be fear, right? So the distress you may go through may be economic uncertainty. Like the rate environment is changing in a way that doesn't work for you. That's going to create distress. Your members are experiencing financial woes. They can't pay you back. That's going to create distress. And then we take that distress and we turn it into fear. Oh my gosh, if this happens, what's the board going to say? What's the NCUA going to say? What's the future of my credit union look like? Now I have to hurry up and do something, and that may or may not be something good. Flip side to that, oh, hey, we can buy a bank, go through a merger. Like this is a really exciting growth opportunity. And for leaders who activate in that environment, then it's like they're suddenly move. And their team's like, whoa, what about that work-life balance you said was important? So it's still a stressor. And I want to clarify that because it doesn't have to be a negative stressor.
I was just thinking that idea that as a leader, when you get excited about something, that communication is so important because it's not like you want to be like you're already 10 chapters into the book and you expect everybody else to already be there. And they're like, I didn't even know there was a book. So yeah, I could see that completely.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked before quite a lot on the podcast about, being people who love change, but like recognizing that it's actually not that common to be someone who loves change. And so if you're a leader who's so excited about a change, but you generally recognize inclusion as a value you want, and you want to bring everybody along and you want to be collaborative in your leadership style, you may notice yourself abandoning that value in order to get to results. And that's an interesting thought on alignment too, because sometimes even when we hold clear values, like I just spent a bunch of time doing disc profiles with one of my clients, and they talk in there about some of the values that individuals hold. And if you're somebody who values both results and collaboration, sometimes you could find yourself challenged in those. So like,
I'm laughing because that's that. Sometimes you're just like, collaboration is great, but I know what to do, so I'm just going to do it.
And that's exactly true, right?
Yeah.
And so if you don't have a really high level of self-awareness, you may send conflicting signals to your team where they're like, oh, they asked my opinion, but then they just, they took action on it before I even had time to give them my thoughts. Yeah. Like, oh, so, all right.
Again, as we were thinking through this one, is there a time that leaders maybe make decisions where they think they're trying to please people, like to avoid the discomfort? I guess my question on that is, when as leaders we get to, like, if we find ourselves in that position where we're just like, I want people to be happy right now, trying to get away from the discomfort, in the long term, I don't think that's necessarily the best course of action. So I guess my question is, why do we sometimes fall to that? When I think about it afterwards, and I'm probably going to use the wrong word here, but it feels like lazy leadership at that point. And I think about myself in that, where I'm just like, I could explain, or I can just kind of push it off. Be like, oh yeah, like, okay, here, yeah, don't worry. Instead of like taking the time to face it. I think I'm talking in circles here a little bit.
It's interesting because I think there's a difference between making decisions that you're hoping are going to please everyone and deferring decisions. And both of them are possible actions when a leader who may be typically fairly decisive is under stress. They could go in either of those directions, depending on kind of what their norm is. And I do wonder if that comes down to, like, if you are someone who values harmony and peace, are you more likely to either defer a decision, like delegate it to someone else, or make the decision that you think is going to make everyone happy? I do think, though, in that case, it would probably be really helpful for the leader to talk to Tracy as an executive coach, but but also for the leader in that case to really question kind of what else is driving that. So that, why am I making this decision? And going back to the Curiosity podcast, like, maybe ask a couple more levels of why than you normally would. So why am I making this decision? Well, because I'm in a hurry and I want everybody to be happy. Why do you want everybody to be happy? Why are you, and does it get down to, well, I'm super afraid of turnover right now because we've been seeing some struggles in the talent market, and that's really the challenge. Okay, well then what's your organizational philosophy on that? And like, where do you really stand on that? But that's kind of are you making this decision in a hurry because there's another decision that's more important for your time? And if so, is it truly better to maybe delegate that? Like if your highest value is spent on a different decision, and that's why this one is getting the wrong attention, who can you delegate it to? One of the challenges I see leaders sometimes make is when they're leading out of alignment, they actually are maybe taking on too much themselves. And they think, well, I'm being supportive of my team, or I'm focused on results, and this is the way to get them. But if they really stop and kind of hold to, wait, how do I really show up as a leader when I'm at my best self? They may find some solutions that are a little bit different than just moving fast in the wrong direction.
As we move on and talk a little bit about realignment, like bringing us back together, that was something that, that I was thinking about is like, and you just said it, like taking the pause to kind of, to look and to like ask the question, does this still connect with our goals? What matters most? Do the goals change? If they did, well, then we got to kind of go back to the starting point. It's not just adding in new things along the way. It doesn't mean we can't be flexible. So that was something that I guess I was thinking about. So before we talk about creating alignment, and before we talk about like how we maintain alignment, because lives ebb and flow, and so do our credit unions, right? Like the economy ebbs and flows. There's so many things that do. What would the first step be if you realize like you're that CEO, you're that senior leader, and you're like, boy, we're out of alignment right now. We're focusing on things that have nothing to do with why we're here, and these don't serve us. What's that next step to go? You've already had the realization. You had the epiphany. You woke up in the middle of the night, right? You're like, oh, okay. What do I go do tomorrow?
Yeah. So the problem is the epiphany might be sudden, but the move out of alignment was probably over a very long time period. So reminds me a lot of that frog in boiling water anecdote. And the hard part about that as a leader is you have to find out, like, you can't just take the frog out of the water and be like, we're all good now. You actually, in this case, using this anecdote, you actually have to go back and figure out how that frog got in the water in the first place. And that's a much more...
In that analogy, I'd be like, don't let the frog keep boiling. Take it out of the water, then you'll figure it out.
Fair, right? I mean, don't keep going. Yeah. But the reason I say that is because if you don't figure out how the frog got in there, it's going to get back in there. Yep. And so you have to take some time. You can't just go back and be like, hey, team, we were in the wrong direction. We're all good now. Because the team is like, hey, we followed you down this path. And some of us don't trust you as much as we used to because you took us down a path that we actually told you we maybe shouldn't go down, and we went anyway. So there has to be that, there has to be that pause, as you said. But that pause does require some self-reflection, and it requires the leader to actually be able to say, why did I do this? And to what extent can I convey it? And so I think there's a really important opportunity for a leader to actually be transparent and clear. And, it's probably not, if you have an 800-person organization, this is not an all-staff meeting where you say, hey, everyone, it's really more to your closest advisors, and then they take it to their teams as appropriate. But that ability to say, here's where I meant to take us. I think I got distracted by economic stressors or overcommitment or too much noise in the environment. We're recommitting. We're coming back. Here are the lessons we learned, and here's where we're going. And this is not the only time we're going to have this conversation, because this frog was boiling for a while. And if you need to come back to me tomorrow or next week or even 3 months from now and say, hey, I know you said we were off that path, but it's feeling like misalignment again, that door remains open, because when we do get out of alignment, it does cause damage, and we need to give people that opportunity to repair in their own time.
I think of something that you started the podcast with, and I think it fits in here so well also, is it's not just like, okay, so here's what we're going to do now. It really is going back and communicating the why Even if that's like, well, that was our why 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, it still should be. It was a good why. And we need to do things that get back to that. And part of that, like,
wasn't a marketing campaign. Right. It was a North Star.
Yeah, that was it. And we got to steer the ship back to that. And that may mean not only in the short term as you're trying to realign yourself, the organization, going back to that why often, but hopefully that why stays there going through, where you just, even if things feel good, new idea comes up, new whatever it happens to be. Does that fit with our why? If it doesn't, it's probably a really good idea for someone else. Might not be us. So.
And that's just personally, that's a big challenge I had, because I love to say yes to things, right? But to be able to actually say, oh, let's only say yes to those things that truly align with who we are and why we do this too.
As we start to get towards the end of this episode, one of the things to me that I think I've learned over the years that is so important is aligning the goals with that why, with the organizational mission. And I kind of mentioned it earlier with the story, that idea of like, if it's important, let's make sure it's defined, right? We can't go, oh, and that. And if it was something I think down the road, like you talked about, kind of that humility to be able to have those conversations, just because you set goals or a strategic plan in place. And if 6 months in, you're like, we forgot this, and it's really important. I don't think that means that you have to wait a year, but on the same regard, if you can't be like, so I'm going to measure you we're going to measure the organization in the past 6 months of that too, that we weren't talking about, even though it was we realized later that it was a major pillar, let's just call it. So,
that goal clarity is everything. And this is it's maybe one of those leadership paradoxes, this idea of be clear on goals, measure people on what you say you're going to measure them on, but also, because I guess alignment is just all about navigational stuff. Like if you find yourself 2 degrees off course, fix it now, because you're only 2 degrees off course. Because if you continue down this path, you become much further than, like, if you stay 2 degrees off course for a long time, you are much, much further.
Then you get a dumpster fire.
Yeah, right. You end up in the middle of the ocean and not on the island you intended, right? And so, and that's where an important part of clarity comes in, because you don't want people just being like, oh, they just keep changing the rules on us. Like, you want to be able to say, here's what we missed. Here's why we're pulling this back. And here's what it means to you as an individual related to your focus, your evaluation, how we move forward, and why we're doing that.
All right, I'm going to go down a complete rabbit hole here, because this is, and I shouldn't, because we're 32 minutes in, but it's my monkey mind, because I feel like it's a conversation that you and I have often, and I don't know why it just popped into my head at this point. And I tend to be I'm
on pins and needles.
I know, because it tends to be me who's like, well, if that person doesn't align, then there's probably a better opportunity for them elsewhere. But it's, as an organization, it is not our job. It's not the organization's job to try to force the alignment of the organization on an individual who just does not seem to fit. You're the people person in this one. I'm the one that's like tries to balance between this is our why in the CUInsight way, and also like let people be themselves, bring your whole self, but your whole self still has to align with what we're trying to do. If your view of what CUInsight should look like is completely different than what CUInsight is, that might not be the best alignment for you, right? So thoughts on that?
Yeah. So definitely thoughts on that. I think this is a place that requires a lot of scrutiny, maybe. And here's why I say that is because Humanidei is very clear on the fact that we work through equitable and inclusive processes with everything we do. And something we believe is true is that if you're looking for cultural fit or executive presence, sometimes those are code words to just bring in more people like me. And that is not going to give you the greatest diversity in an organization. That said, we also recognize we are deeply rooted in our values. And we recognize that we must be uncompromising in those values in order to be who we say we are. And so we might get somebody who wants to work with us or wants to be part of us for a reason other than our core values. And we might find ourselves being called away from that because we're like, oh, well, we're inclusive. And so it's been a continuous learning journey to be able to say, there is a difference between cultural fit and values alignment. Now, it may be true that fitting in with our culture means appreciating our values, but that's different than, oh, we all like to go to the same after hours events or whatever, and that side of it, or we all graduated from the same college or something to that end. And so I think what that requires is a leader who really can, again, it takes us back to the very beginning, like, what do our values look like in action? And how can we detect, not just when someone is a little different than us or thinks differently than us or brings different types of ideas, but how can we detect when somebody is actually behaving in a way that contradicts those organizational values we have? And I think that is everything. When you talk about like, oh, you may not be one for us, that is probably a place where leaders need to be uncompromising. It's certainly a place where I've learned I need to be more uncompromising.
I don't even know how many years now, 16, 17 years into CUInsight, which is the longest professional experience of my career, right? I hope
you have a 20th anniversary.
Well, that'd be fun, huh? But I think about it, and from day one, Dave and I, because that's obviously the longest I've ever worked with a person either, as business partners, and we've had so very little disagreements over those years. People would be shocked on, as I was listening to you talk, I'm like, but at the core, even at times, the why may have been different for each of us, right? But at the core, our values aligned. And what we viewed as the values of CUInsight, those have aligned the entire way through. And I mean, sorry, I was just throwing that there. Way to go, Dave.
Congratulations.
It's just wild. But as you were talking about that, I'm like, wow, that's so interesting that there hasn't been the friction that you would expect over that period of time in any relationship, quite honestly. Yeah. And I think a big part of that is because in the end, even if one of us screws up or the other one views that we screwed up, in the end, we know where we were coming from. Like, it's still that same value set. And that's what we've tried to put out there for the people that are on the team as well. So, yeah. Anyways, I told you it was a rabbit hole. So
that makes me deeply curious about what your and Dave's personal values are. And maybe this is not a place to really like lay it out, but it's very interesting.
when you're doing our strategic planning for us or something, or, our board training, since we're doing this founder board role also, we knew how to be entrepreneurs, but this is all new to us still 6 years later. Anyways, as we wrap this up, I just took us 6 to 8 minutes down a longer path there. So that is my monkey mind that many of our longtime listeners are probably used to. So anyways, like, we're wrapping this up. Think about, and people are out there thinking about alignment, and if they're feeling that it's missing in themselves personally, their teams, what would you like to leave people with? And I'll go next because I didn't know where I was going right now. So okay. I went down a thing, but like, yeah, is there either a takeaway or things that you've learned over your career? You just talked about like something you realized you had to really focus on was the value side to make, because it's like that North Star. Yeah. What would you like to leave people with here?
I feel like this is this is not just a cop out, but I feel like I always go back to self-reflection and self-awareness. And so in this particular case, like what you said, there was a moment a little bit ago where, and I think I've probably shared this on the podcast maybe before, but I was listening to Maria Martinez from Border Federal Credit Union talk, and she made the comment that like her leadership belief is you give people chances, you give people lots of chances. And I'm like, yeah, that resonates with me. I'm into that. And because Maria had said it and I agreed with it, I just sort of took it at face value. And what I learned is I needed to really think about what what it is I'm willing to give people chances on and why. Like, what is the driver of that? And so what I kind of came to is because I assume good intent. I assume that nobody comes to work and is like, you know what I'd like to do is be mediocre today. And so if somebody makes a mistake, I assume that there's something else going on. And so giving people lots of chances for me really ties to technical mistakes. Like, you make a mistake, you miss an email, something like that is like, okay, well, let's coach through it. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out versus like a values misalignment.
Yeah, it's tough to coach values.
So if you're thinking about that on face value and it's like, oh, we give people lots of chances, then it's like, oh, well, Julie just never fires anyone. It's great. And so, but if I dig deeper into that and say, well, why do I feel like this? Well, my number one value is growth. And so I believe that people can and want to continuously improve. And so that's where that really ties into that style of it. But if I just leave it at, well, we give people chances, then I may end up actually moving against something that else is out of values alignment with that. So that's kind of the self-reflection. And when you start to feel like something, just dig a little deeper because maybe the value you think you have is supported by something a little further down than that too.
The thing that I will leave everybody with is a little bit of a trust your gut.
Mm-hmm.
Like when things feel off, they probably are.
Right. And that's your first sign.
Yeah. When you find yourself laying in bed and you're thinking about something because it just doesn't feel right, or it's the first thing you're thinking about when you wake up in the morning, you're like, something feels off. And even if you're looking at the numbers, membership's growing, everything looks good. Just had a good NCUA just came through and was like, you're amazing. But you're like, something feels bad here, right? There's a good chance that that's probably a values alignment that's going off. So I think you and I both agree on at that point, you got to pause and take a look internally. Like, why does this feel so off to me? Right. I don't think I'm just a negative Nancy and I can't accept the good,
Right.
Like, why does this feel off? So yeah, I would say that listen to that internal gut that a lot of the times it's right. So as we wrap this up, I would ask everybody out there, think about where alignment might be missing in your leadership or your team or your credit union. What shift could you make to get everything pulling in the same direction? Because I think we've all had that, whether it's in small doses or long runs where you're like, we're all here together, and it feels good for everybody. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I think it's really important that people do. I mean, in order to make that shift, take 5 minutes to just really think, what are my values? What are my priorities? And then make that adjustment if it's needed to bring them back in sync, because alignment doesn't happen by accident. It's built through that clarity, that consistency, that persistent focus on it.
This was a conversation that we were both obviously enjoying. This is a long one for the two of us. But anyways, with that, I do want to just give a shout out and a big thank you to the Sheeter Group for supporting and quite honestly allowing us to have these conversations. They have been a sponsor most of this year, and they've been fantastic about that. So check out the show notes for links, sheetergroup.com. There's resources. Also, you can find ways to stay in touch with us. And please don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Spotify. I'm afraid to say.
Anywhere you listen.
Because we're sitting in our kitchen. If I say Alexa, she's going to ding probably. But so on Amazon, you can follow us there, wherever you listen.
We'll be back soon. But until then, be well, stay centered, and lead with alignment.
And most importantly, thank all of you for listening and allowing Jilly and I to have this much fun doing what we do. Be well, friends.